Hey everyone, Nick from Accounting Add-ons here, and in this video I'll show you how you can create a simple profit and loss report for Xero within Power BI using OdataLink. This video assumes you've already got set up your OdataLink account, that you've connected your Xero data file, and that you've also configured your Xero model. Now let's get into it. The first thing we'll do is choose the endpoints we want to use. So we'll go to OdataLink, go to OData Feeds, find the URL we want to use and choose copy. We'll jump back to Power BI and we'll go get data from OData Feed, paste our URL and click OK. Now we'll want to select a few endpoints. We want to include the accounts, accounts totals, accounts types, data files, dates by month, as well as the profit and loss multi-period table, which is a brand new endpoint as of March 2023. We'll then click transform. And now we'll start editing those endpoints. Now starting with the accounts endpoint, the first thing we'll do is expand the data file and choose to keep the data file ID, and we'll untick use original column name. So that'll allow us to bring the data file linked to that chart of account. Now next, we'll choose the fields we want to keep. So we go to Home tab, choose columns, and we'll untick all the columns we don't want. We'll keep the data file ID, account ID, code, name. We'll remove status. We'll keep the type, class, but we'll remove pretty much all the other fields. And we're doing that just to keep the endpoint nice and concise. We'll click OK. And that's the chart of account edited. The next one is the accounts total. For this one, we'll basically keep all the fields, but we'll make a copy of that endpoint. So we'll right click and choose reference. We'll rename this to accounts totals types. We'll move it up to place it where we want. Now in this copy, we'll keep the account total column and the accounts type column, and remove the other ones. And then we'll expand the account types to include the account type and the RCR sign. For the original account totals, we won't touch it, we'll keep it exactly like this. Next, we'll edit the accounts type endpoint. And for this one, we'll just choose a few columns. So we'll keep the account type and the name, but we'll remove all the other fields. Now these four accounts endpoint will allow us to move the data between the totals, the account types that make up each totals, the list of account types, and each individual account and their type. So in a nutshell, you've got a hierarchy between totals, types, and accounts. Next, we'll edit the data file endpoint. And for this one, again, we'll just choose a few columns to keep, being the data file ID and its name. For the dates by month table, the first thing we'll do is filter the financial year to include 22, 23, and 24. We'll then choose the columns and remove financial month, calendar year, calendar month, first date. We'll right click on the date column and we'll choose transform to date only. And we'll right click on the date column and we'll rename it to date. Finally, we'll go to the display string and click the expand button and choose the format we want, which is MMM year. Finally, we'll edit the endpoints with most of the meat in it, which is the profit and loss multi-period table. We'll click on the little gear icon next to the invoke function step, and we'll tell it to download data from the 1st of July 2022 to the 30th of June 2024. We'll tell it to download or to break the data by months by setting the period to month. We'll tell it false for payments only, so it downloads both cash and accrual. And we'll tell it to download the standard layout, and we'll set that to true. We'll then click OK. And this will download the data that we're requesting. Next, we'll click the choose column and we'll remove the columns we're not interested in. We'll keep the data file ID, but we'll remove the name, the code, the from date. We'll keep the to date. We'll remove the period, the payments only, the standard layout, the line type, we'll keep the account ID, we'll remove the name, the line type, but we'll keep the amount. Now this will remove most of the fields we're not interested in. And finally, we'll apply a filter to the account ID to only remove the ones that are flagged as null. And we'll apply a filter to the amount to remove all 0 values. And lastly, we'll right click on our to date field, choose rename and rename it to date. And that's our profit and loss data ready to go. Now once all the endpoints have been transformed, we can go close and apply and load the data into Power BI. Once we've got the data in Power BI, the first thing to do is add relationships between our data. Now there's two different ways. I can go to the models view to have a look at the relationship that Power BI defined automatically for me. Or alternatively, I can go to modeling and manage relationships to have a look at the relationship dialog that essentially mimics the same thing as the model view. Now, either approach works. I prefer the dialog myself, but you can actually look at a diagram instead. So first up, we'll start with the profit and loss table. And we can see we've got a relationship between the data file ID and the data file, so that's good. We're missing one between the profit and loss and the dates, so we'll add a new one. Choose profit and loss multi-period, select the dates column, choose dates by month, and select the dates column. We'll make it a many to one because there's many records linked to a single date, and we'll click OK. Now the other thing we notice is we want to enable this profit and loss to the accounts table, but when we turn it on, we get this error message. Now the reason that is because we've got two tables with a link to the data files table. We've got it through the profit and loss, but we've also got it through the accounts. We technically don't need both. We'll delete the top one, and then we should be able to turn on that one. So now we'll look at the accounts relationship. We've got one between the totals and the accounts totals type, so that's good. We then have one between the accounts totals types and the accounts types, but we're missing one between the accounts type and the accounts table, so we'll add that. Click New, choose Accounts, select the type column, choose Accounts Type, select the account type column, and make it a many to one because there's many accounts linked to a single type. We'll click OK. Now that should be most of the relationship set. Now it's also worth mentioning quickly that if we look at the relationship, there's a choice between cross-filter direction of single and both, and depending on how you build your reports, you might have to change this between single and both. We won't touch that just yet, but we'll just keep that in mind. So we've finished with our relationships for now. We can always come back, so we'll click Close to close this dialog. Now to build our report, we'll first start by using a matrix table, which will expand to fit the whole page. We'll want to have our chart of accounts down the page, so we'll drag the account name to get listed down as rows. We'll want to use the months across the page, so we'll use MMMYYY, our display column, across the page. And we'll want to use the amounts as the values. So that's the rough skeleton of our profit and loss. So we'll also want to include the account total name and the account type. Now notice as I drag those columns, I've got a problem with my display. And that might be due to that relationship single or both that I was talking about. So we'll go back to manage the relationships. We'll go to accounts totals, we'll choose edit, we'll make sure it's set to both. We'll do the same thing for all chart of accounts. And we'll click close. And notice that the problem is solved. So that's the important bit of that cardinality, or that direction I should say. If it's set to single, it can only filter the data in one direction, and that might cause problems. So some relationships might need to be set to both. You can technically set them all to both, but that actually consumes more processing power. And we know we only needed to really play around with the ones relating to accounts because it only broke once we added the accounts total. Now the next thing we'll do, just so we can see the data a bit better, is we'll right click on the accounts column, the first column, and we'll tell it to expand all levels, just so we can actually see some data. Now that's the rough skeleton for our report, but we'll notice a few things. The account totals are out of order. We're starting off with cost of sales, followed by gross profit, followed by income. You can notice they're actually sorted alphabetically. Now to fix that, we'll go to the Data tab, we'll select the accounts total, we'll highlight the account total name, and we'll tell it to sort this column by this order column. Now to do that, I can choose sort by column and choose order. And when I do that and return to my report, you can actually see income is followed by cost of sales, followed by gross profit. Now that concept can be done for everything. You'll also notice the months are out of order. We've got April because it starts with A, followed by December, followed by February. So we'll go to the dates by month table, we'll highlight the display column, and we'll tell it to sort by the dates by month ID. If we go back to our report, we've got December followed by January, February, March, and April. The data sorted much better. Now another thing we'll notice is income is 17,000, cost of sale is 763, and gross profit is the sum of the two, and that's not right. It should be one minus the other. We also don't want gross profit to be broken down by the constituent accounts. We technically just want to have a single line. Now we'll solve those problems using DAX formulas. Now the DAX formulas can be very complex, but we'll break it down into 3 separate ones, but I'll also show you how you could have done it all in a single formula. The first thing we'll do, we'll go to our profit and loss table, we'll right click and choose new measure. We'll call our measure movement 1 details, and we'll make it equal to calculate, open bracket, sum, and we'll sum the profit and loss amount column. Now this formula just does a sum of the profit and loss amount column. If we were to replace the amounts we currently have with the new one, you'd see exactly the same figures, but it's basically the starting point. The next DAX formula we'll create is one that will solve the issue of gross profit, so it calculates correctly, being income less cost of sales. I'll call this one movement 2 underscore for totals, and it will be equal to a SumX formula that will look at the accounts totals types, and it'll use movement 1 details, the previous measure we created, and multiply it by the accounts totals type DRCR sign. If we hit enter, we can then drag that measure in instead of the other one, and you'll notice gross profit is now made up of negative 763 and 17,000, and that's the correct formula. So we'll look at the formula more in depth. What it did is it grabbed the movement 1 details that we calculated previously and multiplied it by the accounts total, the RCR sign. Now that's a special field that the accounts totals provide, and if we jump to it, you will notice that for income it's got the value of 1 to tell, essentially treat as a positive figure. For direct costs it's got a value of 1, but for gross profit it's got 1 for revenue and minus 1 for direct cost. So by us multiplying it by this column, we're actually reversing out the direct cost value. And that's why it's done a subtraction. Now the final DAX measure we'll create is one that will hide the breakdown for gross profit and net profit. To do that, we'll right click, choose new measure, and we'll call it movement 3 final. Now this one's going to be a bit more complicated. It needs to remove values for rows that are accounts, but when the total is not the actual natural grouping of the account. So what it will do is an if statement. It'll use if the selected value of the accounts total is account classification is equal to false, and is double ampersand, is filtered accounts equals true. In other words, if we're looking at an account total that's not an account classification, and we're looking at an actual chart of account row, then in that case, we want to use a value of blank. In all other cases, we want to use our DAX measure. If we hit enter, we can then drag that field and remove the other one. And you'll notice it's removed the breakdown for the accounts, but it has kept the values for direct cost and revenue. Now we don't want that, so we can actually add an OR statement here to say OR is filtered account types, account types equals true. So whether I'm an account row or an accounts type row. Now if we click out, you'll notice gross profit is not broken down any longer. If we click out of the DAX measure, we can double check our numbers. 17,000 minus 763 equals 16,000. Operating expense is 14. We've got $97 of other income, and our net profit is 2,000. Now we'll also notice that the total is not meant to be there because we're doubling up everything, so we'll remove the total at the display level. But our chart is producing the right figures. Now if we quickly jump to the data sets and have a look at accounts totals, we've got a value for is account classification of true or false. So when it's true, it's the natural grouping of that account: income, direct costs, expense. But when it's false, it's the actual total only. So it's a gross profit, or it's a net profit, or it's a net asset. And that's how our measure controls the toggle between those values. It's looking at the value of the totals, whether it's an account classification or not. And when it's false, and we're an accounts row or an accounts types row, we're going to use a blank value, which means don't calculate anything. And because it doesn't calculate anything, the row won't appear. If we wanted to create a single measure that does all these three measures in one go, we would start with the endpoint. So we would start with this one. I'm just going to copy the code for this one. Right click, choose new measure. I would call it movement. I'd make it equal to this whole construct. Now to keep it a bit more concise, I'll split it into multiple lines so I can follow the logic a bit better. Now once I've got that, I would grab the formula for our second measure, which is the sum x. I would copy that, and I would replace this movement for totals with that value. And I would go movement 1. I would copy that part of the measure, and I would replace the movement 1 with that value. If I click out, I would end up with a single movement measure that does all the work at once. Now that's usable and that's useful, but it does make the formula much more complex to understand what's going on. It's up to you whether you'd prefer having 3 separate measures or a single one that does everything. Now to remove that final total that we don't want at the bottom, we'll basically go to the Format Your Visual tab. We'll choose Row Subtotals. We'll apply a per row level. We'll go to the account total name and we'll turn it off. And that will remove the total row. But it's kept all the other totals in place. Now that brings us to the end of the video showing you how to create a simple profit and loss report for Xero. There's extra steps you can take to actually polish the look and feel of that report. But from a skeleton point of view, this is all the steps involved. I hope you found this video interesting, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.